you look out the window and watch the climate change happen. I think what impressed me the most actually was happening here in this town. Usually you would look out and see the big icebergs floating by, and the tip of the iceberg would be visible above the mountains. And someday I looked out and I couldn't see any tip of icebergs. So that was kind of shaking me very, very dramatically, and I was feeling like, you know, watching a mountain, it always stays there. It's I felt the same way about the icebergs, that there was something happening which I didn't imagine would ever occur.
I think Ilulissat is one of the most dramatic places in Greenland to see climate change, because it has one of the largest glaciers in Ilulissat Ice Fjord, and it has some of the biggest changes. You know, that band of clean exposed bedrock that I was talking about, it's really wide, it's huge in Ilulissat, and you can see the glacier flowing into the sea and just how high the stresses are and the ice dynamics causing all those cracks in the icebergs flowing into the ocean. It's a very dramatic setting. Climate change is not uniform around the world, of course. Generally, there's more warming on land than over water, and generally there's also more warming at higher latitudes than around the equator. So places in the Arctic that have land have much higher warming than the global average. So what we see happening in Greenland is repeated across all the Arctic nations to some degree. But of course, Greenland has the most ice, and it presents the biggest sea level rise threat, which is why it gets the most attention.
But one thing is for certain: Greenland is losing ice. The world's sea levels are rising. If Greenland ice melts away totally, that's 7 meters. 40% of all people live at the coast, because they live in cities with harbors, where ships are coming in. And if you get 2-3 meter rise, it's going to be so terrible.
From your outstanding research, what are most insights to tell the world to care about climate crisis?
So I think when you go to the Greenland ice sheet today and you get close to the ice sheet, you'll notice that, you know, the tundra is dark and covered with plants all around the ice sheet, except in this little band where you can see where the ice has retreated since the Little Ice Age, about the year 1900. And there you see that the rock has no vegetation, it's relatively bright, freshly exposed, there's still dust on it from the ice sheet retreating. And that trim line, as we call it, or the bathtub ring, showing how the ice has retreated, you can see that getting bigger every year. And you will go to places where you know that the ice was 100 meters thicker 60 years ago, and you go there today and you see the change with your own eyes. You go to places where you know that they drove through and surveyed stakes 60 years ago, and you go there today and you just see massive crevasse fields that have been exposed as the ice flow is changing. So the changes are quite shocking and striking if you know what to look for.
I think for us, you know, if you go to the ice fjord here in Ilulissat, you will see how quickly the ice is actually moving away from the coastline, and you see that on the vegetation not being there. So it's very, very visible proof that we have here.
So when you stand on the fjord wall and you watch those icebergs slowly going into the ocean, you're watching about 1% of the global sea level rise contribution leaving Greenland and going into the ocean. It's one of the biggest point sources of ice loss from the ice sheet today. Right now, the ice sheet is losing about 10,000 tons of ice per second every minute of every day of every year. That's on average. That's an inconceivably large number. It's so huge. And I think that is what's difficult for people to understand, is just how big the numbers are, how big the forces involved are.
我现在在的位置呢是格陵兰岛的田格路上，那后面呢就是非常有名的一个罗素冰川，整个北极冰融速度越来越快。当地的居民呢告诉我们呢，昨天看到前面黑色的这一块呢是昨天才崩落的也是在24小时之前。冰融下来的水呢非常的湍急我们刚刚看到在下游地方呢已经是一片大河了。气候变迁呢，我相信应该大家会很有感受，整个欧洲的高温热浪袭击非常非常的明显在这个世纪末到下个世纪初，我相信全球各主要城市都有因为气候变迁带来就是城市港口被淹没的可能，我们应该要有所行动了。
You know, you grow up and then you see all of these beautiful, huge icebergs, and then you come back after like 3 years of studying, and then now they're suddenly decreasing. Because it's different when you hear about it in the news. Well, when people say, yeah, climate change is happening and the ice is decreasing, but you can't really like imagine what's happening in the world when you don't see it with your own eyes. So of course it's very sad to see it.
So it's quite different already with the changes, and the weather has shifted. Like when it was supposed to be summer, now it's very cold, and when it's supposed to be winter and we should have a lot of snow, it comes later on. So it's very different from when I was a kid to now.
And rainfall is happening a lot more than it used to. So before, as I said, when I came, just a couple of times a year in the summer. But now we are experiencing on a weekly basis rainfall, and when it rains, it's often a lot. So it's a huge difference between when I came just to now in a few years.
As our Prime Minister said, if you look outside, climate change is happening, but if it's not only happening in Greenland, it's happening all over the world. If the glacier melts, New York would probably sink. There's also some Asian towns that are drowning right now. We are melting, we are drowning here in Greenland, though they are burning in the outside world. So it's a bit saddening to see.
Every single year that we're here, the glacier is receding and the glacier is losing vertical height every single year. So we had substantial change that I'm seeing every time I come out. And even when I guide, when we're walking up the slope behind us, there's water coming down in front of us, and that's the glacier constantly losing mass.
Yeah.
And because we have very warm summers and the winters are not very cold, we're not gaining ice anymore. The ice is not coming forward as much as it used to, so it's not making up the summer loss. So therefore we have each year a net loss of ice that is catching up to us, and eventually this glacier will be gone.
我现在呢是在北极圈里面的坎格鲁萨对，我刚刚下飞机呢，那我这里用温度计来测量29.6度，天哪，29.6度，你不相信这是在北极圈里面吧？天哪，这可能是我在北极圈里面拍过温度最高的一次了对，这是北极圈。
太扯了。
We cannot get around that. We can come up with a lot of other factors that might influence it, but our carbon footprint is the key factor in this aspect, because we don't get around the fact that it is our carbon emissions that are the key factor in this.
There is some consensus that a good amount of carbon dioxide to have in the atmosphere would be around 350 parts per million, which would be great. We'd have a stable climate, what we were used to historically. I was born when it was 340 parts per million. Now, some days it gets up to about 410. So we're way past the 350 parts per million threshold.
And we see in the ice cores that climate change can happen like this. So, the problem now is that we see a higher level of methane and carbon dioxide than in the last 1 million years. And we know from physics that if you introduce methane and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, you increase the greenhouse effect. And that means the Earth will get warmer.
Did that have some obvious evidence about the research to see? Because the reason is from the human activities.
The IPCC assessment reports have done a really good job of partitioning the radiative forcings of each of those elements to show beyond a doubt that it is the increase in carbon that is tipping us towards a warmer planet with warmer atmospheric temperatures, but also, and very especially, warmer ocean temperatures. And we talk a lot about atmospheric temperatures, but really about 90% of this extra energy we're trapping in the planet is now in the oceans. That people don't think about that a lot in day-to-day life, but when you think of the Greenland ice sheet and it has those glaciers that dip their toes in the ocean, as warmer water starts to come into those fjords, Ilulissat Fjord included, as you will see, it really starts to melt and destabilize those glacier toes and cause them to flow out faster. So in Greenland, yes, the atmospheric warming is a huge driver of the increased surface melt, and that's a huge issue. But we also have warming from below in the ocean that's destabilizing the tidewater glaciers. So Greenland reflects both of these processes today.
我现在这里的位置呢，是在格陵兰岛呢 Ilulissat 的北方哈。那这里有一个非常有名的冰川，就是爱奇冰川，是冰川崩解哦，一个非常明显的一个现场哦。附近你看到非常多的一个浮冰哦，都是因为崩塌后以后啊，变成非常多小小的浮冰哦，在这附近。我们刚刚沿河过来的时候呢，有很大块的，又各形各状的不同大小的浮冰。这两天呢，我们在这附近啊，都有听到很多冰裂解的声音。那个裂解的声音，就我觉得有点像那个打雷的那个声音哦。就是非常震撼的一些声音啊，叫啪啪啪啪啪，就是你会感觉好像要发生很重大的事情了哦。
This winter, the winter of 2022. Was one of the tough winters. But this winter, for example, we had to take the boats out for 3 months. They were on shore for 3 months. Last year we had the boats in all year, no ice. So that's kind of how, you know, it's difficult to plan ahead because you don't know what kind of winter you're going to get.
Like our forefathers adapted a lot to the weather, like where are they going hunting, where are they catching fish, and when are they going through the year, and when are they catching these animals. But now it's very, even though it's season-based, it's very difficult sometimes to go out and catch. So
the sea is here, it's frozen to ice.
Frozen to ice.
Yeah, then we go out and fishing on the ice.
Yes.
And now we can not go on the ice, we cannot use it anymore.
But I think the climates have been changing a lot. You know about that. When I was a kid here, I had snow, so much snow in the city, yeah. And then we had a lot of years without that much snow. But the last 2 years, we actually have had a lot of snow again.
So in several years, the glacier and the inland ice has been melting a lot. And it has affected the local people as well, because during winter, locals, they do sled dogs and they go fishing to the inland ice, and then they can also see that the ice, it has been melting and it has visibly been decreasing.
You can see the affected area here goes down. You can see also the tops over there, but we have to go over here. You can see the top up there. It goes down also. It used to be flat. It melted, and and people cannot live here anymore because of it's unstable.
So it can be quite expensive. It needs to be planned well in advance because it needs to come by ship that comes only at regular intervals. Also, a lot of the building and repairs will be constrained to quite a short season. So most of the things you want to do in summer, not in the cold winter. So there is a lot of constraints that relate to the repairs here.
像这个房子呢，就是很明显的嘛。你看下面这一条线哈，过去那边呢，在后面的时候呢，照理说它应该是一个平行的线哈，那其实它都已经是扭曲了哦。地基下陷以后呢，造成这个房子呢会有危险性哦，所以他们做了一些补救的方法，灌到地底下大概6米的以下的地方哦，就是灌了冷却液下去哦。那些水分还是可以把它凝结起来哈，然后回到原来的那种强度哦，不要让它地基松软下去哦。这就是现在在克什鲁萨这个地方呢有弄土溶解以后呢，造成土质呢就是崩陷的问题，那他们所做出来的一个就是补救的一个措施，那他们说是没有办法中的办法了。
As much as possible, we're using, as we can, our Greenlandic products like herbs, and as well as from all the local hunters and local fishermen. So we're purchasing that from local fishermen. Yeah.
Why do you think is it related to climate change?
Well, personally, I haven't really felt any effects. But what I see...
And maybe it's because of climate change, I don't know. But the climate change could also be positive. So we could grow another species of vegetables.
No. But he knows this kind of thing, right?
내려오면서 카페가 지식약동마 지나나 비슷한
The habits is not about climate. Forget all about climate, because it's small peaks. We hear that the inland ice is melting. Yeah, that's right. We can feel the warmth, but not such amounts of warmth. It's particles from the.
So climate change is always a bad thing?
No.
No.
In South Greenland it's good because we are growing, agriculture is getting warmer down there, and sheep farmers are using that.
People say from Greenland also have the bad part about the climate change and much more maybe the good part, the positive part about the Grand Atlantic. So what's your opinion about that?
I know the position, especially further south or the very south of Greenland, that farmers would claim that the crops are growing faster, they get more to feed the animals with grass and stuff like that. But it seems like it's like peeing in your pants. that it warms for a little while and then it gets cold again. It's hard for me to pinpoint any positive sides of climate change, because as I said earlier, it's affecting every way, and in the end it threatens who would we be in the future if not we are able to hunt. That's what we live off. We live off fishing. We live by the ice, with the ice. If it disappears totally, who are we then?
I think most people in Greenland, most Greenlanders, they prefer the climate as it was. The history of the country is very cold, and the history of the indigenous people here are hunting for seals, hunting even for polar bear, walrus, whales, and I think most people would like to continue that lifestyle. They view it as their culture and something they value it. They find very valuable.
Good horsetail could be problematic because it has quite long roots. So if they sort of grow down into the archaeological layers, they start to destroy the artifacts, but also just like move the soil around, so we don't have a structural layer anymore. So that could also be a problem for archaeological sites, that we get more.
And that means that all of the human waste, the human activity, the animal bones, the skin, everything that used to be preserved in the cold is now slowly disintegrating in the heat. You can end up having like really beautiful plants, but no archaeology left.
Because you can, with a glacier you can see it with your own eyes, it's melting. But here we have things that are hidden beneath the ground. So and that's also our fear, that if you have a site and you come back in 20 years, it's just completely gone.
I don't think it would be a problem for us to live here, and also when the ice is disappeared, because we live high. The sea level will get higher, but it will even reach the houses. We don't have houses near to the sea like you have in Europe, and the countries are very lower, and I think they are the first countries who have to face it hard when it comes to there.
Greenland is still one of the sweet spots on Earth, I think. It's pure, it's clean, I mean, if you like outdoor life, this is the place to be. You're like 5 minutes out of your front door and you're in the nature. The only downside is that we get fluctuating weather, we get more unstable weather. But I would think that probably applies to most of Earth today.
아마도 아리상nok 이마토안너트노 좀 콩막술너간기다 이리와 고시오기다 지금도 마르낭유했더미마
In Greenland, we can see it spreading in just the last 5 or 10 years. It's becoming more and more common. They suddenly spread very fast. You even see them quite a lot in the city here. And they spread in nature quite fast. And they can outcompete local species. So that is always a danger that you get these invasive species.
Fishing is going very well with the increasement of water temperature, at least for this part of Greenland, yes. For this region, it has meant that the shrimp population out here seems to be increasing. But at some point, when the water becomes too warm out here, the shrimp population will then migrate further north.
If you suddenly lose those fatty Arctic species, that means that species like the humpback whale have to eat a lot more of other organisms that is not as fatty to get the same amount of energy. We are not seeing that, it's not happening yet, but it's just these are potential things that could happen in the future, that we see a shift because these Arctic species are moving further away.
They are cold in the summer, for example, so the sheep can come home not so big, thick, the skin is too skinny. They have to be fat in the December month, so they have to be fat and fit so they can have twins. If they are not skinny, it's so they normally would only birth one. We always more lambs we used to.
Somewhere it's getting even colder. Somewhere else it's getting warmer. The rain is falling more heavily. The storms are stronger, and everything is changing. So it's a global phenomena. But those who are impacted the most is those people living in the Arctic area. And I read somewhere recently that the number of sled dogs, for instance, have been diminishing. Like half of the sled dogs the owners had to kill them because they couldn't afford to feed them because they cannot go on the sea ice anymore.
昨天晚上到现在雨是真的下得蛮大的哦。我们访问了前总理库里克他告诉我们说，格陵兰呢有这么大的雨势其实是很少见的哦。工作犬呢，最近的数量也大量的减少，为什么呢？因为他们已经不需要它了哦，就是地面上呢，就是有雪或有冰的时间呢是越来越少了，只有在冬天的时间那会比较厚。其他的话其实已经都用不到工作犬来拖东西了，所以这个区域的工作犬原本呢听说有8000多只那现在呢几乎只剩下3000只左右，那5000只哪里去呢？5000只都安乐死了。那我有问他们说，为什么就是要安乐死呢？那当地的居民告诉我们说，因为数量蛮大的，然后呢他们未来的生活也没有人可以好好照顾他们所以就给他们安乐死。我想气候变迁呢给我们带来很大的生活上的冲击，也许下一个气候难民就是我们。
We have about 100 projects per year or something like that coming in, and we have about 250, 300 scientists. I started up this project up in northeast Greenland, I think almost 30 years ago, and it's still running, and we are still doing very much the same, where they have been lying there hard working for maybe 12 hours per day out in the field. Then they come back with what you could call a small piece of equation for climate models.
So it's a very slow process, and we do it because our perception is so much control, and we do not dare to take decisions before we are convinced that we are taking the right decision. And that's why we are modeling and modeling and modeling on and on. If you look
Do you still remember last year in the August 14th? You know, they have the post and in New York Times about the raining in the ice sheet. Yeah, it's the in every record it doesn't seems like rain on the ice sheet.
That was a very extreme event. We're not used to getting rain on the ice sheet. Everybody was starting to guess that we would start to get rain on the ice sheet because of climate change and the atmosphere warming and holding more water. So at the Geological Survey of Denmark and Greenland here, we had started to put rain gauges on our weather stations on the ice sheet. Normally they don't have them because there's no rain. But then that event happened and it was very unexpected, and we didn't have any rain gauges, for example, at Summit yet, because nobody expected there to actually be rain at Summit anytime soon. We thought we probably had many years to roll out the rain gauges. So that one caught us very unaware.
Trouble is, the complex system on weather and oceans and mountains and people and everything is so complex, it's very hard to say precisely how this is going to happen. And that is why everybody in the world is using climate models, computer models to do. But we can prove from the ice cores that the computer models we use are wrong. Yeah, in certain degrees they are wrong. They are the best we can do, but we can also demonstrate it's not enough. We are still stupid. We are still, there's many things we do not know. And the problem with the computer model is it also contains what we don't know, but in a bad way, because that means maybe the result is not completely right.
The ice sheet likes it to be cold and frozen all the time. And liquid water is just very corrosive to the ice sheet because it contains a lot of energy. So when there's more liquid water, through melt or through rain, it starts to flow into the ice and it heats up the ice. And that can make the ice flow faster, much faster in fact. The viscosity of ice is very dependent on temperature. If ice warms by 10 degrees Celsius, it can flow 10 times faster for the same driving stress. It's a huge response. So that is the huge concern about rain and melt. If we have more rain, more melt, it can make the ice flow faster into the ocean. And we're not entirely sure how much faster or what the total implication is going to be. And that's always been one of the sources of uncertainty in Greenland sea level predictions, is how sensitive are the ice dynamics to this increasing water input. Generally, our models and our climate models are best at reproducing the average, and extreme events can be challenging because some of these events that bring rain to Greenland, for example, they're over a very limited space and a very limited time. So you need really high resolution of your models in time and space to capture these processes. You know, we talk about things like atmospheric rivers, which is just a bunch of warm water coming from low latitudes up to high latitudes and bringing moisture and heat onto the ice sheet and causing these extreme events. But something like an atmospheric river is a very small scale process at the scale of the whole planet. And these processes are hard to resolve in a climate model.
It's important that we don't get distracted by single years or small events. Like one year we might have a very cold year with a lot of sea ice, and then it's easy to say that global climate warming is not happening. That keep in mind the facts because what we are seeing now is a lot of variability. It doesn't mean that climate change is not happening. It doesn't mean that climate change isn't happening faster than it did 10 years ago.
Those of us who study climate change, we think we have a pretty good idea of how it's happening and how it's happening faster than politicians are reacting. But an event like that comes and it's happening even faster than I think it should be happening, which makes me a little cautious about where we're going in the future. It's happening faster than we forecast at the moment.
So I would say to all the people who are climate skepticists that if they believe in physics and mathematics, if they believe in 2 and 2 make 4, and if they believe that certain gases like methane and CO2 actually enhance the greenhouse effect, and the Earth will be warmer, that's enough for them to worry.
I think climate researchers in particular are starting to talk about a little bit more about climate anxiety or climate grief. Yes. When you think about the future, yes. Just this gloom. It's not joyous work to project the demise of the Greenland ice sheet and wondering about what that's going to mean for the world and wondering why nobody seems to care and you scream alone into your pillow or Twitter account and no one cares. Yeah. So I think there is a huge sense of helplessness. And I think those of us who have kids are especially sensitive to the direction the world is heading, especially with climate change. But at the same time, I have to be a little optimistic that at some point we will take action. We've waited too long. The next best time to take action is tomorrow. We'll probably wait longer than that. But at some point, it's going to get so bad with the sea level inundation, with the wildfires, with the crop failures, that people will have to notice and take action. And I'm sure that turning point is coming, and I hope it's sooner rather than later. Because yes, I mean, 2100 sounds far away, but of course, a child born in Denmark today or Taiwan has a demographic expectation of living beyond 2100. So in some ways, the 2100 cohort has already started to populate the Earth. So it doesn't seem that far away in human timescales.
How I feel about this is the clock has started, and the clock now is going much faster. We're constantly speeding it up. So what we're asking our kids to do is we want them to stop the clock. We have to stop it now, because by the time it gets to them, the clock will be way too fast. They won't have the time left to make a difference. We have the time now to make a difference. They won't. So I hope we actually do something so our future generations can walk on this beautiful glacier again.
Less sea ice, more sea ice, warmer, colder, all these extremes. And we have to deal with this. And it's not, I'm not an alarmist generally that say that we have to panic, because generally panicking about things isn't constructive. We need to find constructive long-term solutions to this.
The world will not end. If we get climate change, it will be a new situation. But we will not all die, and the Earth will not end. It will just be another one. Yes. And it's very important that the young people do not panic and say, oh, now everything stops. No, we have to take the challenge to think, to adapt, and to cut back on emissions in a sensible way. Yes. But take it easy.
Don't panic.
Don't panic.
And the last 3 IPCC reports have been pretty conclusive in saying it's CO2, we need to lower CO2, it's CO2, we need to lower CO2, it's CO2, we need to lower CO2. I don't think writing more scientific papers is the best way to address this problem. You could hire 1,000 glaciologists, and the ice sheet will still melt at the same rate.
Yeah.
All we can do is diagnose the scale of the problem. So I think the most important task facing us right now on the climate action is educating people. And educating the people in charge, or educating the people who aren't in charge to tell the people who are in charge what to do. Trying to wrap that up for people in a way that they can digest in between the other things they have going on in their lives. I mean, looking after the kids, looking after the parents, doing their job at work, maybe having a hobby, seeing their friends, and then caring for climate 1%, 2%, maybe 5% of their time.
My message is very simple. Please, please, please stop burning fossil fuels and go on renewables. Wind, solar, hydropower, whatever. That would be so lovely.
We can always do something individually. We don't have to wait for others to do so or tell us to do. And I think it's very important that we all think that we can start today. We don't have to wait.
So I think focus should be replacing fossil fuel on very large volume consumers like power plants or production facilities in general.
Our neighbors are burning, we are drowning. So please be more thoughtful of your fossil fuel consumption and commute to work by public transport at least once a week. That would be nice.
I would love to say that we would love to see more education about the climate changes and more connection between the different countries, generally in all of the countries, about the climate change that is happening now. Because after all, climate change is under children's rights. Every child has the right to live in good conditions.
I have and quite big workshops where I have had all from local hunters to you know, and also representatives from the scientific community, and then all the relevant stakeholders, both national and international stakeholders, in relation to these issues, simply to discuss what are the important issues and how can we solve them together. I don't want to stimulate the ideas. I want to facilitate the process of getting the ideas, and I think that's one of the things that I can actually, that I can make people with very different backgrounds cooperate, and that's maybe my best quality.
It's useful to think of 3 possible futures: the low emissions future or Paris Agreement, a middle of the road, and then a high emissions. And right now we're on the high emissions trajectory, which some people call Mad Max world. It is low technology, low cooperation. It's not a good place. It ends up in resource scarcity and a very poor climate, like the movie Mad Max. At the very far other end is the low emissions pathway, which would be Paris Agreement. And some people call that Star Trek world, where it's like high technology and high cooperation. And then somewhere in the middle is maybe this third road, which is something like what Denmark has today, a sort of ecotopia, where we have medium technology, medium cooperation, but we all have relatively smaller carbon footprints. And trying to explain that range of possibilities to the average person and why we should be so afraid to avoid the high emissions scenario, that's a huge challenge, because it's not a very positive message.
Now, I've seen in Greenland how much it has changed. I remember the icebergs being twice as tall. I've seen the diminishing of the sea ice until we could no longer ride our dog sleds. I've seen the retreat of glaciers and the heating of our summers. It's changing the very livelihood that we Greenlanders came here for. You see the beauty of Greenland? What's worth protecting that we would like people to come and visit? We need cradle-to-cradle design. We need zero-emission society, but most of all, we want a future we can be hopeful for, one that our children are looking forward to grow up in, one with sustainable transportation, earthly biodegradable goods and services, and we need a sustainable community that we can invite you to here in Greenland.
解冻格陵兰采访记录团队亲自造访11个城镇，与专家学者、政府官员、当地居民深度访谈。气候变迁已经是不争的事实，因应调适跟积极的付诸行动，才是我们每一位都必须面对的课题。然而，格陵兰的冰融也带来了丰沛的水利资源，使得这里的再生能源使用率超过了60%。孩子们能在夏季的溪边开心玩水，变暖的洋流带来了丰富的渔业资源。从冰层中裸露的土地，有着更多的可供畜牧、耕种的农业发展机会。我大胆地预言，渐渐地，在北极的格陵兰将成为宜居的城市。
We have a lot of difficulty getting attention on climate change because there's so many other things happening in the media landscape, rightfully so. When the last AR6 assessment had its final release, it was 10 days before Will Smith slapped Chris Rock. And so, you know, you have this process. It takes many years, thousands of scientists to try to produce a state-of-the-art assessment on global climate. This is the climate roar. This is the event. Everybody should focus on this. And then like 10 days later, Will Smith slaps Chris Rock and the whole media moves onwards. And so that is the sort of thing that we need to think about, how to stay socially relevant as climate scientists. We need to understand that we also have an obligation to put our knowledge and our insights out into formats that are accessible for the general public and not just feeding up into assessment reports for IPCC. And, you know, engaging more with like what you're doing, which is a documentary to communicate climate change and climate change implications to a wider cross-section, that will probably be more impactful at the end of the day than me producing another 20-page PDF that goes on the website somewhere.
The best advice I feel I can give to this documentary is to support civil society to become more active in promoting solutions to climate change. And I think there are two key roles that civil society can play. One is as voters, and put pressure on politicians and governments to be more aware of the impacts of climate change, and that we need to find solutions very soon to climate change. The second is becoming active consumers and put pressure on business to deliver more green products in line with the net zero targets, and also, of course, products that are green, more green in totality. And I think that the more you can link what you're doing on spot, on site, different places in the world, to the global movements for civil society, the more impact the documentary will have.
Melting Greenland is a call to action, not just for the next generation, but for all of us, now. The effects of climate change are being felt in all corners of the globe every day. Everybody has their part to play in limiting these effects. Governments, businesses, and consumers. Businesses need to place sustainability at the heart of their operations. And they need to work with governments to help implement the solutions and stress the urgency of the positive policy changes that are needed. There are some great news stories. For example, wind and solar are now the cheapest form of electricity in many countries around the world, and an increasing number of businesses, for example, the ones that we work with, the RE100, are transitioning to 100% renewable electricity because it makes business sense. But we need to go further and faster, much faster. It's time for everybody to step up and take action.
说真的，出发前我们那时候如果还没收集资料的时候，说有蚊子，我们就说这个资料谁查的，对不对？
对，查到有蚊子，大家还不相信我。
对，就说这资料谁查？怎么有？对啊，
照着那么丑，不要。
结果当地人呢，你知道我们来这里的时候，那个向导带了防蚊网，结果我们反而这个外地人，
那个蚊子呢，就像那个战斗机一样，然后不断的攻击。
想到千万个人在欢迎你，就是蚊子大军在机场。
现在看到这些在飞的都是蚊子。
一定要试一下啊！
哇！这个蚊子的 size 是录得到的。
我想把它打掉或是甩掉，可能会看到你要拍。
你买这些不是来御寒，是来防蚊。
对，蚊子真的太多了。
它只能咬你的鼻子。
对，我要把鼻子给盖起来。
你有没有觉得这几天那个船长都很会开船？
对啊，船长在这边
那个船，
我不敢开，因为我们那个船小小的，那个冰有的很大，那个撞下去跟撞石头一样。开玩笑，
每次都很怕甩我。
所以我就一上去，我马上就找那个救生带，所以我已经穿得整整齐齐的。我觉得那个实在是风险太大了。然后开船的都是他们当地的原住民，都是经验非常好的那个老船长，开得很快，然后闪的那个闪过去
甩
我看到他那个冰，他怎么找到那个风可以甩过去甩过来，哇，真的很厉害。
更挑战的是说，很多我们知道说那个冰块啊，它不是只有表面上我们要闪表面的冰，
它下面还是凸出来的，
下面还有吃水那么深，其实它下面的那些还有冰层，有时候肉眼看到它其实下面很大一片都是蓝色的，它还要闪过那一片，其实就知道说哇，那个每一个要经验要非常。 With the family. 你们要撞到冰山嘞！
船长特别带我们来浮冰上面体验哦，就是在这个上面你会觉得它是会摇晃晃的感觉哦。以前我们看浮冰都是看电视上有没有，或者看什么报道。就我们在这里每天看浮冰，看到哇，那个浮冰数量，我们从飞机上看就已经觉得不可思议了。对，就是
像一点一点小白点。
对，然后其实后面的报道里面会有非常多，就是每一条冰川它其实往后退的速度都有科学家的一些记录啊。这个在整个格陵兰有非常非常多世界各地的科学家长期住在这边，还有各大学的研究人员。为什么？就是要研究这些就是地理的这些一些变化，然后来做气候变迁数据的一些佐证是这样子。格陵兰应该越来越受重视，因为这是第一个呢，在北极圈里面它是有原民的，就是有原住民的，有原住民文化，因努特人，对，所以这是我们选择来格陵兰的原因。为什么？因为我们想要从这些原民的居住在当地居民的口中，让他们来告诉我们他们的所见所闻。因为这里的极端气候的变化，可能就是我们家乡、我们每一个城市未来的样貌所要面对的所谓的急剧变化的情形。有人可能认为说你们在这个北极附近当然就是这样子，他说不是，他们以前其实是蛮稳定的变化的。
我们甚至有问当地人，就是说他们如何的去选择说就是他们的穿着。假设他可能要出去一个行程，可能是1天啊，或者是2天，那他不确定就是天气的状况到底怎么样。然后当地人就回答说，就是其实他们早就习惯了，对啊，就是早就习惯这样的状态。
这里的大自然的景观景色，然后这些变化都不是我们在台湾可以想象的。我可以这么说吗？
对，没错，一定。
然后是不是说我们在台湾在出发之前到现在来，你看见的是不是都觉得它甚至都更放大？对不对？你第一次到冰川下面，还到冰峡湾的时候，你有什么感觉？
那个冰川下面真的跟远远看不一样，那个到下面看激近
20-30层楼的高度。
对，
然后你以为你已经到长旁边，其实没有，还
差得远。
对，
我那天讲了一个说，我们大概200公尺，那个船长说你大概还有2公里。我说天哪，那这冰山到底是多高啊？
我们现在身后这个冰川看起来很近，距离我们1.4公里。
对，还有1.4公里。
对，
是我们那天去上次去那个冰川，Iki 的时候，宽度你看那个还好嘛，宽度5-6公里。对，所以说它就是大概200米高的一个冰川。
然后我们开船就以为很接近，其实他们说还有6公里。
对，有叫我讲一个，来格陵兰就有视觉误差，你知道吗？就是距离判断错误。
对，
就是因为这里那个大山啊，有没有那种大
水
无比巨大？
你看得到，虽然可能很近，但是你可能实际走的还要很长的一段时间。对，所以在那个判断距离的时候，都会产生这样的一个误差，视觉误差。
我现在在北极，这里是伊鲁里萨特的冰峡湾，是非常重要的世界自然遗产哦。那刚刚我们工作结束了，那现在是我们喝咖啡的时间了。在这里呢，喝杯咖啡，看看冰峡湾的美景。来格陵兰发现什么？知道？坐船、坐飞机不正常开是很正常的。那个飞机说不飞就不飞，说2个小时以后就2个小时以后，
引擎坏掉就整个都不用开了。
有一句话形容怎么样？
他们格陵兰语叫做 Imaga， 他们把它解释英文叫做 maybe， 更贴切的叫做再说吧，再看吧。因为对他们来讲，就是说明天的天气不知道怎么样，再说吧。
对，这天气变化
明天的引擎会不会坏掉？再说吧。
我们在那边等飞机，那天在飞机场等飞机，对。后来就是等着登船拿到了，后来飞机取消，为什么飞机降不下来？对。然后我们在那边等着，要准备要离开，要明天再来，对不对？结果呢，雾稍微散开，有一班飞机下来了，全场鼓掌，就是有一班可以下来。根本是没有什么蔬菜，都是进口来的，所以是当地的食物。然后请问一下，金鱼肉好不好吃？我跟你讲哈，现在一盘金鱼肉跟一盘高丽菜，你会选什么？绝对是高丽菜。
绝对是。走在路上，然后经过一个那个菜摊，然后我就看哇，有菜。对，然后那个菜吃起来有点像是
山芹
菜。
对，在 CC Moot 的时候，他说大概距离在30几公里外的地方，啊，那边有一片就是会在夏天的时候，它会长出的野菜，
所以它就是短短的时间，然后才长出来的野菜。
Do you want to take it back to Taiwan?
很重吗？还蛮重的，绳子都被这些草跟土给都缠住了。制造日期是2003年，重点是 Made in Taiwan。哇，这是从台湾来的电视
酷，就好吧。
哇
！Exhibition from Taiwan. Made in Taiwan.
Yeah. 哇，这个是
unbelievable. 我在上捡到的。
这什么袋子？
它不能。